push record. Booyah. Okay. So one of the components of the cardiovascular system is our heart. Okay, but you cannot forget the other parts of the cardiovascular system. Right? Blood vessels. Right? That's for another chapter that we'll be focusing on. We're going to focus pretty much on the heart here. Right? So keep in mind, what do we call a structure that carries blood away from the heart? Arteries. Arteries away. Okay? And what do we call something that brings blood to the heart? Veins. Right? And the capillaries are where we're going to get to be, I don't want to say mixing the blood, but that's going to be in the tissues where we get an exchange, all right, between the tissues and the blood vessels. Good. All right. So let's break it down real simple. Okay. When we're talking about the heart, we have a 4-chamber heart. Okay. Does anyone know how many hearts an earthworm has? It's just an FYI. Did anyone here ever dissect an earthworm? I didn't do it. It's got 5 little mini hearts. It's really kind of cool. Not like a mini heart with different chambers. They're really simplistic. But anyways, okay. So keep this in mind. The right side of your heart has deoxygenated blood. Okay? Deoxygenated blood just means there is oxygen in it, but it's lower. Okay? All right, there's not very much oxygen in that blood. So we call it deoxygenated. All right? And that, all right, the right side of the heart is going to push or pump the blood to the lungs, because the lungs are going to oxygenate it. Okay? The left side, this is what carries that oxygen-rich blood. And so it's going to send the blood out to the body. Okay? So essentially, your cardiovascular system has 2 separate systems. Okay? You have the system that goes to the lungs, and then the system that goes to the tissues. So we give the system that goes to the lungs, we'll talk about here, it's called the pulmonary system, and then the system that goes out to the rest of the body is your systemic, all right, blood vessel, cardiovascular system. So 4 chambers. The top 2, all right, the superior chambers, all right, they're going to receive the blood, and they're going to send that blood to the bottom 2 chambers, and we call those the ventricles. Okay? And then our ventricles are the bottom chambers, and they're going to pump the blood out of the heart. Ventricles are bigger. They're usually a little bit, the walls are a little bit thicker. What's the type of muscle tissue found in the heart? There's three muscle tissues: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. Cardiac. I know it does. I know. I'm gonna pull it out of you. And I know it's in there. I'm gonna stir it up and I'm gonna pull it out of you. All right, that information's there. All right, so cardiac, we call that when it's in the actual heart wall, the myocardium. Okay. All right. So we good with that? I'm gonna start off real basic, real simple. All right. So you can see here on this model. Okay, the blue coloring is representing the deoxygenated blood. So you have the right atrium and the right ventricle, and you can see the pathway of the blood. It comes into the right atrium, goes down into the right ventricle, and then it gets pumped out, and it goes to the lungs. Because now we're going to get rid of the carbon dioxide, and we're going to bring in the oxygen. And when we do that, our blood is going to magically turn red. Okay? So, all right, then that blood leaves the lungs, all right, and it returns to the left side of the heart, enters into the left atrium, moves down into the left ventricle, and the left ventricle pumps it out through the aorta. It goes out to your body. Okay? All right. This is just another picture. Whoops. There you go. This is just another picture just to kind of show you. All right? Good so far? All right. So now let's talk about some of the blood vessels. And this is where it gets a little bit confusing for some people. And if I explain it in a way in which it doesn't confuse you guys, awesome. All right? Because that's, again, keep in mind, arteries carry blood away from the heart. Okay? Veins bring it to the heart. Okay, but not not all the blood that travels in the arteries is going to be oxygenated. Okay, that's where people will get confused. And most times when you hear about people like severing an artery, you're thinking of that red, rich oxygenated blood. It's not always like that. We're going to see here. Okay, so let's talk about the great vessels that make up, all right, the blood vessels around the heart. Okay, so the definition of these great vessels is they're going to bring blood to and from the chambers of the heart. Okay, so as you see here, all right, we have 4 different ones. We have what's called the pulmonary trunk, and when you see pulmonary, think lungs. Okay, and so the pulmonary trunk is going to transport deoxygenated blood, all right, from the heart's right ventricle to the lungs. Okay, so it comes from, if it's the right ventricle, remember the right side of the heart is deoxygenated or blue. Okay, then it's going to go to the lungs, get oxygenated, and then it's going to return that blood to the heart. And when it brings blood to the heart, it is now known as a vein. So that is the pulmonary veins, because they're telling you where they're coming from. They're coming from the lungs. Pulmonary veins are going to be bringing oxygenated blood to the heart, and it dumps it into the left atrium. Okay? And I'll show you right here. Okay? Here's the right side of the heart. Here's the right atrium. Here's the right ventricle. So as the right ventricle, all right, pumps blood out, this structure right here, all right, that's the pulmonary trunk. And it splits. One goes to the left, one goes to the right. Okay? And then when it comes back to the heart, all right, it comes back, and these guys right here, this is the left pulmonary veins. And they're going to dump the blood back into the left atrium there. All right, so now on the left side of our heart, okay, we're going to have blood being brought back from the body. So the blood that comes from the top portion of our body comes through the superior vena cava, and the blood that comes from the bottom portion of your body comes from the inferior vena cava. Well, they both drain into the into the right atrium. Okay, they're going to bring, all right, deoxygenated blood, all right, into the right atrium. Okay, and then it's going to get dumped into the right ventricle and leave the body through leave the heart, all right, and go towards the lungs through the pulmonary trunk. So that's the left side. Did I say left? Right. God, I'm so confused myself. Give me a second here. All right, let me review that. Okay. I feel like I should start over, but I won't. Okay. Okay, so superior vena cava and inferior vena cava are going to drain deoxygenated blood from the body into the right atrium, which will then move it to the right ventricle, and it will get pumped out of the right ventricle, all right, to the lungs through the pulmonary trunk. Okay? The aorta is going to then transport blood from the left ventricle out to the body, and it carries oxygenated blood. Okay? I'm not going to spell the whole thing out. I can't write with a mouse very well. All right, so let's see the great vessels here. Okay, so here you can see, here's the superior vena cava, here's the inferior vena cava. They drain into, all right, the right atrium here. And then that blood will get dumped down here into the right ventricle, and then that right ventricle will pump it out through, all right, our pulmonary trunk here into our left and right pulmonary arteries. Takes the blood to the lungs, gets oxygenated, then that oxygenated blood returns to the heart, all right, through the pulmonary veins. That's these guys and these guys here. And they get dumped into where I'm putting this X, that's the left atrium. Then it gets sent down to the left ventricle, and then the left ventricle pumps it out through the aorta. Okay? And those are your great vessels there. Questions so far? Okay, good. If I'm going too slow, let me know. Speed it up. Okay, so we learned the chambers. We learned the great vessels. Right now we have to learn the valves. The valves are a one-way door. Okay, kind of like these doors in this classroom. They only open in. Okay, that one actually opens out. All right, but they only move in one direction. Okay, so these valves here in our heart, you have two sets. Okay, the first set that we're going to talk about are the AV valves, also known as the atrioventricular. So they're telling you exactly where they are. They're the valves in between the atrium and the ventricles. Okay, and the important thing, and you need to understand this, all right, these valves ensure that blood only goes in one direction. That's good, right? We don't want it backflowing. Okay, that's bad. Because if you get backflowing of blood, you can get what we call turbulent blood flow. You can get damage to the tissues there. All right, we want it to be nice and laminar, nice and streamlined, nice and smooth. If you get turbulent blood flow, you're going to increase the likelihood of clotting. Okay? So, do you remember there was another phenomenon in the body? You learned about it in 210 that only travels in one direction. It's in chapter 12. That helps. Action potential? Y'all remember action potentials, the nerve signal on neurons? You ever notice that it only goes in one direction, one way? And it's because of the voltage-gated sodium channels. Remember, we had the activation gate and the inactivation gate, and it's the inactivation gate. Anyways, my point is, it's a gate. All right, these valves are like a gate. All right, so a lot of these one-way phenomena are governed by, all right, a gate-like mechanism. So think of these valves as a gate-like mechanism. So when we're talking about the right atrioventricular valve, it has three little leaflets on it. So if we're looking down on it, and I'm going to try my best not to butcher this. It looks something like that. If we're looking down, there's three leaflets on it, so we call that a tricuspid valve. All right. Then the left atrioventricular valve is either what we call a mitral valve or the bicuspid. You need to know all these, by the way, too. Okay. And so it will look something like that. Okay. It has two leaflets, bicuspid, also known as mitral. Okay, so those are the valves that are in between the chambers of your heart. Then we have another set of valves, all right, that separate the ventricles from their great vessels, and that's these guys, the semilunar valves. Okay, so the valve that sits between the right ventricle and the pulmonary trunk, we call that the pulmonary semilunar valve. And then the valve that sits in between, all right, the left ventricle and the aorta, hence is the aortic semilunar valve. Good so far? Not too bad? All right. Okay, so those are going to be our valves. Important to know because, all right, when you go to your doctor and they listen to your heart, they're listening to the functioning of these valves, because they need to be opening appropriately and closing appropriately. And when they're not, that could be a possible pathology that's occurring. Again, if these valves are leaky, all right, that could be because there's damage to the valve, all right? Or if they're closing irregularly, then that's going to create and alter that blood flow that we want to maintain so we don't cause damage to the heart or damage to any of our blood vessels. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right, so here you can see the heart valves. All right, so in between, here's one atria, here's the ventricle. So in between the atria and the ventricle, we call those the AV valves or atrioventricular. Here is our right atrioventricular valve. Okay, it is a tricuspid. And then over here on the left side, all right, we have our bicuspid, mitral, or the left atrioventricular valve. And then the valves in between the great vessels and the ventricles, all right, here's the pulmonary semilunar valve. And then over here, you can barely see it. Here's the aortic semilunar valve. Okay? Again, keep in mind, and we'll talk about what we call the cardiac cycle. we're going to learn. And at first, I'm telling you this, it can be overwhelming of all the stuff that occurs during this one single lub dub of your heart. A lot goes on. And we're going to go through it, all right? So, but what I want you to at least walk away from is this right here. All right? The heart valves prevent backflow. One-way movement of blood. Okay? Out. Always out. Get rid of it. Get it out of the heart. Get it to the lungs. Get it to the body. Okay? All right. So this brings us to what I was talking about earlier. How, all right, your cardiovascular system has two like subsystems inside of it. Okay? We have the pulmonary circulation and the systemic circulation. Okay? So the pulmonary is just us sending our deoxygenated blood from the right side of the heart to the lungs. Okay? And that's where we get rid of carbon dioxide. We don't like that. When we pick up oxygen, because we like that. Okay? What's great about oxygen? There's many things, but what is one of the big, awesome things about oxygen? What organelle in the cell loves oxygen? Nicknamed the powerhouse of the cell? Bam! See, as soon as I say that catch term, people know right away. Oh, mitochondria. Yes, mitochondria love oxygen. All right? But oxygen is like that ticket that gets you into the club, all right, so you can make lots of ATP. Because if you don't have oxygen, you can't get into the club, and we can't make a lot of ATP, okay? All right. So that pulmonary circulation is going to then send that blood from the lungs back to the heart, but on the left side of the heart, so we can get pumped out to your body. So that's where the systemic circulation comes into play. That's oxygenated blood. Comes from the left side of the heart, and it's going to go out to all the cells in your body. Okay? And then that's where we're going to get the exchange of nutrients and wastes and respiratory gases and whatnot. Okay? And then all that blood gets returned to the heart on the right side. Okay? So I don't know what this is all about, these little symbols here, but they're supposed to be arrows. Okay? So right heart, all right, moves blood to the lungs, which will move blood to the left heart, which will then move blood to the systemic tissues, and then move it right back to the right side. Got an itch. Okay, so that's what this picture is showing right here, all right, that your book eloquently has given us. We can see the two different circulatory systems. Here's the pulmonary circulation this way. And here is systemic circulation, that way. Okay? Yeah. All right, so keep that in mind. Now, if you have your atlas ready, we're going to do a little bit of labeling. I've inserted, it's a little bit different than how I've done things in previous classes, right? But I have inserted throughout these PowerPoints, all right, labeling exercises for us. Okay, now this first heart you don't have. So you're thinking, well, why the heck are you showing it to me? Well, the slide was given to me by the department, so I'm going to show it to you, whether you want to or not. Okay? So this first one here, because you might even see pictures for this heart, all right, in a lab exam. Okay? So I'm just going to kind of run through these right here. All right? Here is the superior vena cava. This is the inferior vena cava. And they both drain into, all right, your right atrium, right over here. Okay? And then the blood moves into the right ventricle, and it gets pumped out of the right ventricle into this blood vessel right here. All right, that's the pulmonary trunk. And then the pulmonary trunk is going to split into, all right, the right and left pulmonary arteries, right? Because an artery is taking blood away from the heart. Agreed? Okay. All right. So then it gets returned to goes to the lungs, yada, 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 goes to the lungs, and then gets returned to the heart through these blood vessels here, which are pure red. All right, here and over here. And those are the left and right pulmonary veins. So that, yes, it could. It could. Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. I meant to even tell you that. If you guys want to, you are more than welcome to take a picture of that. Okay. You know what? I don't know. I haven't seen it. I haven't looked through it yet. Yeah, if you want to take a picture.
Anything's fair game, isn't it?
Well, for the most part, I mean, no. And technically, you're not supposed to be taking pictures because you already have all the slides, but you don't have this, so I don't have a problem with that. And you can get access to the notes when you watch the video, so you already have all that available. There's some teachers that are very, and I understand because there's a copyright thing, and I won't get into it all, but all right, this one you do have. Okay, this next one here. All right, so, let me just finish off here. Down here is your aorta. This portion of the aorta is considered the ascending aorta, and then you go into this arch-like structure here, and that's the arch of the aorta, or the aortic arch. And then the aorta starts to go downwards, and that's the descending aorta. Sometimes you'll hear it known as the thoracic descending aorta and the abdominal descending aorta. You want to be specific. If it's below the diaphragm, then it's known as the abdominal descending aorta. If it's above the diaphragm, because you're in the thorax, then it's the descending or the thoracic descending aorta. Because there's actually this small part right here, pretty much from here to here, that is the ascending aorta. And then we get into this arch here, and that's the aortic arch. And then it just goes down from there. All right, so let's look here. All right. And I'll talk while you guys label here. I'm going to just go through a couple of these things here. All right. So this view here is a posterior, kind of a superior, but more of a posterior view. So we're looking at the back side of the heart here. Okay. So a couple structures that you can see, and I'll just go in the number value order here. All right. The right atrium, all right, is this area all back here. Okay, because here's your superior vena cava draining into it. Here's the inferior vena cava draining into it. Okay, that's the right atrium. That's getting blood from your body. Okay, that will be deoxygenated blood. Okay, and it travels back to the heart. So anything that brings blood to the heart is a vein. Okay, so on the other side of the heart, back here, this right here is the left atrium, covered up partly by the descending aorta there. Okay, that is going to be the left atrium. All right, then I already talked about this. Number 14, that's the superior vena cava. All right, number 15, that's the inferior vena cava, draining into the right atrium. Okay, on either side, putting too many lines up there. All right, here and here, right? These are pulmonary veins right here. And over here is another pulmonary vein. Okay, so this is over here on the right side of the heart. So these two are the right, all right, pulmonary veins. This guy over here is on the left side of the heart, so that is the left pulmonary vein.
There's the A dot. Is that the artery?
Which one?
It says like L common artery, right? Number 19D.
19D?
It's L, that's the left common.
Yep, left common carotid.
Artery.
Yep, A is artery. Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, and that's another thing. When you're taking the exam, and you don't have to write out artery or vein. If you write A dot is fine. V dot is fine. Okay, you don't have to write the whole thing out. Like muscles in 210, you didn't have to write out the name muscle. If you put M dot, it's fine. Okay, so the same thing applies here. All right, so when you see like this, for example, the L is left common carotid artery. Okay, now if you put L for left and right, yeah, I don't have a problem with it. The computer's probably gonna mark you wrong. You do know that when you get your lab grade back, they're gonna look horrible. All right, because I have to manually go through and correct everything, because sometimes not all the possible answers are in there. So don't freak out. I hope you probably learned your lesson in 210 when you got your lab grade. You're like, oh my God, 50 whatever. All right, and then I go through and grade it all. Okay, so don't freak out. All right, where was I? Superior. Okay, so left pulmonary, right pulmonary arteries, left pulmonary, right pulmonary arteries. Here's the aortic arch. So the aortic arch is pretty much where you see these 3 blood vessels coming off. All of that is the aortic arch, okay, where those 3 blood vessels are coming off. The first one, the very first vessel that comes off of the aortic arch, right here, okay, that is what we call the brachiocephalic trunk. And what will happen is the brachiocephalic trunk will then split off, all right, into your right common carotid artery. You're not going to see it here, and the right subclavian artery, all right, but it hasn't done that yet in this model. So this first guy here is the brachiocephalic trunk, all right. Then our next one here, right next to it, that's the left common carotid artery. That's going to go up to your head and neck, okay. And then it's going to split off into the external carotid artery and the internal carotid artery. And then this guy right here, all right, is the left subclavian artery. Think of clavicle, collarbone, all right, and this artery is going to go into your arm, okay? And then finally, all right, we see the aorta start to take a downward turn, all right, and that is now known as the descending aorta, also known as the thoracic descending aorta. You really want to be specific, all right? Because once it pierces through the diaphragm, now it's in the abdomen, then it's known as the descending abdominal aorta, okay? All right, good so far? Not too bad? Okay, all right. It's easy to get these confused. I'm telling you, when I send out the Quizlets and whatnot, I would definitely start to work on these, okay? Because we're going to start, not today, but we're going to see a lot of different views of the heart, so it can be a little bit overwhelming there. All right, so let's jump back in here and talk about, one, where the heart is located. All right, I think we all know where it is. All right, it's in the thoracic cavity, okay? But it is enclosed in what we call the pericardium, and we're going to talk a little bit about what makes up the pericardium, okay? But it's enclosed in the sac, all right, that sits in your chest, all right, in between the lungs, all right, directly behind your sternum. But it's offset a little bit. It sits a little bit more to the left side, okay? So the space that it sits in inside of the thoracic cavity is called the mediastinum. And some of you may have forgotten what the mediastinum is. The mediastinum sits directly in the center of your thorax, in the thoracic cavity. It's a space, it's a compartment, okay? And so this is where the heart sits, okay? So keep in mind, all right, it sits behind your sternum there, but more to the left. So the heart's twisted, okay? It's turned where the right side of the heart is more exposed. Or when I say more exposed, it's more facing the anterior portion, okay? So if you were to remove the thoracic rib cage there with the sternum, all right, you are going to see more of the right side of the heart, the right atrium and the right ventricle, all right? You won't see the left too much, okay, because the way it's twisted. So there's 2 parts, I should say 2 parts, there's a lot of parts to the heart, all right? But when we're going to talk about its base and its apex, how I remember where the apex is that's the tip, that's the little pointy end of the heart, okay? Where the 2 ventricles kind of come down to a point on the bottom of the heart, that's the apex. And the base is kind of, let me go back to this view here. All right, we're looking here at the base of the heart, all right? So that's kind of like the posterior, superior region of the heart. Oh, wait, you're talking about the veins? Which veins are you talking about? The coronary veins?
Okay, well, so would it be, you're saying this is the posterior.
That's the posterior, yep.
Then would this be the top?
Would that be? No. And that's the hard part about this, because the way you would think, in the traditional way, when you see the heart, you know, this is all, we all thought about it like that kind of thing, but there is the apex here, you know, and the base would be at the top here. That's not the case with this. All right. Yep, you got it. Okay. But you would think, though, where it sits when it's positioned in the thoracic cavity on top of the diaphragm there would be the base, but it's not. It's easily confusing, I should say. Okay, so here you can see it, I hope, sort of, how it's positioned in the thoracic cavity. All right, so here's the thoracic cavity inside the rib cage. The mediastinum is pretty much this area here. Okay, it's like the center. Median is the direct middle, okay? And that's where the heart, amongst some of the great vessels, will also sit in there, your thymus gland, yada, yada. But you'll see it off to this. Let me get rid of that. I'll zoom in a little bit. Okay. So down here, you can see there's the apex there. And the base, we can't really see it, is going to be on the back side, but on the top portion of the back side. So all of this, here's the right atrium, okay? And then most of this is going to be the right ventricle. And you'll see the left ventricle kind of peeking out on the side here. And you can barely, here's a small bit of the left atrium, all right? So it's twisted where more of the right portion or right side of the heart is going to be seen. So to kind of give you a little bit of an idea anatomically, there we go. Okay, you can see here's the second rib. All right, so the second rib comes down. All right, so usually when you're going to listen to heartbeats, you're going to palpate out the second rib and the third rib, and you listen in between those two rib areas there. When you want to listen to the aortic valve and the pulmonic valve, all right, semilunar valves. All right, now what we're going to do is show you like a CT scan, and you can kind of get a little bit more of an appreciation here of where the heart sits. Okay, this space right here is the mediastinum. Okay, in between our two lungs here. All right, now we get to talk about one of my favorite parts of the heart, the pericardium. And we had a little bit of an introduction to the pericardium in 210 because that's when we were learning about membranes. You guys remember the serous membranes, visceral and parietal layers? You probably don't because it's not really exciting stuff. But you're going to find that most organs in the body are going to be covered by serous membranes. There's 4 types of membranes in your body. Serous membrane, cutaneous membrane, which is what? It's the largest organ in your body, skin. Yep. You have a mucous membrane, and we see all those all over the place, like in our throats and whatnot, noses. All right, and then the 4th type of membrane is the synovial membrane. So we learned about a bunch of those last in 210. All right. Now, one of the serous membranes is we're going to revisit that, okay, when we talk about the heart. So the heart is enclosed in a sac, what we call the pericardium. The outermost covering is the fibrous pericardium, made up of a really cool type of connective tissue, dense, irregular connective tissue. Do y'all remember where we find dense, regular connective tissue? Ligaments and tendons, okay? Well, dense, irregular connective tissue, we're going to find that in a whole bunch of different places. The periosteum of bone, the perichondrium of cartilage. Well, another place that we're going to see here is in the fibrous pericardium. Okay, so it's the outermost covering, and it's tough, all right? And it's going to attach the heart, all right, to the diaphragm, all right, on the bottom portion of the heart, and then it's also going to attach it to the bottom or the base of the aorta and the pulmonary trunk. Okay, now its huge role, and people don't really appreciate this, is that it prevents the heart from overfilling. That's good. You know, you put too much air into a balloon, what happens to the balloon? Pops. Okay? We put too much blood into the heart, we can damage the heart. And that ain't good. Okay? So, now, that's the outer layer. So we have 2 more layers. Okay? So just deep to the fibrous pericardium, we have our parietal layer of the serous membrane, or the serous pericardium. All right? It's made up of 1 single cell layer, simple squamous. All right? And areolar connective tissue. That's a loose connective tissue. Okay? And then it attaches directly onto the fibrous pericardium. And then the easy layer to remember is this visceral layer, because what is another name for organs inside of our body? Viscera. Yeah, visceral, I mean, yeah, but viscera being the plural for it, it's viscera. So that's easy to remember. The visceral pericardium, the visceral layer, is the layer that directly attaches onto the external surface of the heart. Okay? So it too is simple squamous, and it has a loose connective tissue. And this sits right on top of the heart. Okay? And if you remember, right, between the parietal layer and the visceral layer, there's a space. Okay? We call that the pericardial cavity. And in that space, all right, we secrete a fluid that helps to decrease friction. If you rub your hands back and forth together real fast, does it not heat up? It gets warm, right? Well, think about what's going on in your heart. It's contracting, relaxing, it's beating on and off, on and off, on and off. So it's going to be creating friction, okay? And as you know, friction creates heat. So one of the ways that we reduce that friction, we reduce that heat, which can reduce any damage that could potentially occur, is that in our pericardial cavity is we secrete a fluid that acts as a lubricant to decrease friction. So it protects it. It's also in this cavity that you can get blood penetrate in there if there's a hole, or you get stabbed in the heart or whatever, or a blood vessel gets damaged, it can bleed into that cavity, and that's bad, okay? Because what happens to blood when it's outside of a blood vessel? What happens when you cut yourself? Clots. You want clotted blood surrounding your heart? It's the same example that I give 210. Would you rather swim in a swimming pool full of water or Jello? It's going to be a heck of a lot easier to swim in a pool full of water instead of a pool full of Jello. Your heart wants to beat in an aqueous environment instead of a Jello-like environment. All right, so here we're going to see in our pericardial cavity, right, that serous fluid, and its job, lubrication, decreasing friction, okay? So you heard me talking about the pericardium, all right, essentially is a sac, all right? Well, the outer fibrous layer and that parietal layer, all right, they are both referred to as the pericardial sac. Okay, so when you hear somebody referring to the pericardial sac, they are referring to, all right, both of those two layers. All right, how's that so far? Is that okay so far? Not too bad? How about you folks at home? Is that okay? Are you paying attention to me, or are you watching Cobra Kai? All right, I'm going to assume that you guys are paying attention. You're good. All right, good. Okay, so here's a picture of our heart. All right, you can see here, zoom in a little bit. Good as well? Good. I like it. I like it. I like it. All right. So you can see here in our diagram, here's that fibrous pericardium, how it's anchoring itself to these blood vessels up here. And then down here, this is the diaphragm, and you can see how it's anchored itself down here to the bottom onto the diaphragm there. So it's not just bouncing around inside the mediastinum there. So then what we're going to do now is we're going to zoom in on this area here, and you can see here's our fibrous pericardium, that's that dense irregular connective tissue, right? And then you can see this thin little layer, this one solid line here, okay? And that's the parietal layer. Right? It's one cell layer thick. It's made up of simple squamous epithelium and areolar dense, pardon? Part of it, yeah. I mean, when you're looking at all those models there in your atlas, all right, you're looking at the visceral pericardium. Okay, that is the external layer on it, directly adheres onto the organ itself. So when you're looking at any of those models, all right, technically you're looking at the visceral pericardium. Okay, until we cut through it. Okay, so you can see here, all right, we have that parietal layer here. Then we have our space. That's our pericardial cavity. All right, that has that serous fluid there. And then see it directly right here, this line. That is the visceral layer, also known as, and we'll go through this when we talk about the layers of the heart wall. All right, also known as the epicardium. Because if you look just deep to that, you see this, that's muscle. That's cardiac muscle, also known as myocardium. Okay, epi's on the outside, endo's on the inside. Okay, and myo is in the middle. Okay? All right, questions about that? All right, not too bad. I know it's not incredibly exciting, but I like it. All right, bang, let's jump into here to the superficial features of the heart. All right, I'll wrap that up. I think don't tell anybody, but I think we'll be getting out here in a few moments. All right. No, I'm really serious. I'm telling you, it's a lot different this semester, you guys. All right. So here we're seeing, all right, we're going to start now looking at the superficial features. That means those are the features that we're going to see on the outside. Okay, superficially. Deep would be on the inside. So we're going to start off by looking at the front of the heart. Okay, so on the anterior view, the front view of the heart, all right, you will be able to see, all right, the right atrium and ventricle. Because remember, the heart's twisted a little bit. Okay, so we will definitely be able to see those very well. Now, in the right atrium, there's a little kind of extension. All right, the textbook describes it as a wrinkled extension. All right, and we call that the right auricle. Okay, and it's just like this little, I don't know how to describe it. Yeah, it's a wrinkled extension, but well, I'll show you. It looks like this is not the right one. This is the left. Well, here's the right one. All right, this little ending thing here. All right, you can see the left one a little bit better. This is the left auricle, and over here is the right one. Okay. I guess that's the best word I can use to describe it as an extension. All right. But you'll be able to see all those. Now, all right, on the left side of the heart, you can definitely see part of the left auricle, but you're not going to see the left ventricle very well. You can see barely a little bit of it. Okay, because again, that heart is rotated and twisted. Right? But for our blood vessels now, we can definitely see the pulmonary trunk very nicely and how it splits into the right and left pulmonary arteries, okay, taking that deoxygenated blood to the lungs, okay? And then we also can see, all right, the parts to the aorta, all right, the ascending aorta, which is not very big, and then that nice arching portion, that's the aortic arch, and then our descending thoracic aorta. So I'll show you here real quick. All right, so there's our anterior view. This is the same thing that I just showed you a couple slides ago. All right, so pretty much all this is the right portion of the heart. Okay, well, overextended on that one. There, that's the right portion. And you can see the left is kind of peeking over a little bit of the left ventricle. Okay. All right, but you see how nicely we can see, all right, the aorta, the ascending portion, and then our arch, and you can see the descending portion over here. All right, then we have our pulmonary trunk. It splits off into the left and right pulmonary arteries here. Okay, you guys gonna see that? Not too bad. Okay, all right. This is again the superficial view for the anterior portion. So let me jump here into your atlas, make it worthwhile for you. All right, this is the anterior view, what I just described for you. Now this is rotated a little bit more than it would appear in the body. Actually, if you wanted to see how it really looks like in the body, we would rotate it to our right a little bit more. All right, but let me just go through here. All right, here's your right ventricle. All right, here's the left ventricle over here. Right, and then you can see right over here, there's the right auricle. Right, and then our left, you can really see that one pretty predominantly. There's the left auricle. Again, it does definitely look wrinkled. It's an extension off of the atrium. Okay, here's the pulmonary trunk before it's split. Okay, pulmonary trunk. All right, and then you can see here, you got two left pulmonary arteries. You can't really see the right pulmonary arteries. Okay, here's the ascending aorta, and then the aortic arch right here, and then right over here is the descending aorta. All right, you need to know these branches. So the first branch off of the aortic arch is the brachiocephalic trunk. Brachio meaning what? Arm. Yeah, that's the brachium. Okay, between your shoulder and your elbow, that part of your upper extremity is known as the brachium. Okay, so this is actually telling you where this blood vessel is going to go. Brachiocephalic. Cephalic means what? Right, head. In French, they call it the tête. T-E-T-E. Yeah. Yes. All right, so brachiocephalic, meaning this blood vessel is going to supply the arm and the head because, like I said, it'll split off into the right common carotid, all right, and then into the right subclavian. Okay, so it'll split again. So the next great vessel that comes off the arch of the aorta, all right, right here in the middle one, okay, that's the left common carotid artery, and that's going to go up towards the head. And then the last one over here, that's the left subclavian artery, and that's going to head over towards your arm, left arm. Okay?
So what is the left pulmonary, is it, what's AA?
It's just artery. Yeah.
Why is it AA?
It might have been a miss. Sometimes you'll see people say artery twice.
I thought it was the aortic arch.
No. Yeah, good thing you asked. Yeah. Oh, I thought you were going to say, yeah, AA. Yep. All right, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause here. Okay. Like I said, we got a good, decent